Welcome aboard the Bedtime Express, where magical stories carry you gently into the land of dreams. I'm your conductor for tonight's peaceful journey, and we have a truly special adventure waiting for you. Tonight, you'll be listening to Magellan's Dream Voyage, a soothing bedtime story about the brave explorer Ferdinand Magellan and his incredible journey across the oceans. We'll sail with him from the ports of Spain, across the vast Atlantic, through mysterious straits, and on to the endless blue waters of the Pacific Ocean. This gentle tale is filled with wonder, friendship, and the beauty of discovery, perfect for drifting off to peaceful sleep. Before we begin our voyage, please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy relaxing bedtime stories, and don't forget to subscribe to Bedtime Express for more magical adventures delivered right to your dreams. Leave a comment and let us know what kind of bedtime story you'd like to hear next on our peaceful journey together. Now, find your most comfortable position. Close your eyes and let your breathing slow down naturally. Allow yourself to relax completely as we set sail together on Magellan's gentle voyage across the dreaming seas. All aboard the Bedtime Express, your journey to peaceful sleep begins now. Magellan's voyage around the world. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a brave explorer named Ferdinand Magellan. He was a man with eyes that sparkled like the stars above, always gazing toward the horizon where the sky kissed the sea. Every night, when the moon rose high and cast silver paths across the ocean waves, Magellan would dream of magical places beyond the edge of the world. In the quiet port city of Seville, where orange trees perfumed the evening air and gentle breezes whispered secrets from distant shores, Magellan walked slowly along the cobblestone streets. His footsteps echoed softly in the twilight, like a lullaby for the sleeping town. He carried with him a dream so beautiful and bold that it made his heart flutter like butterfly wings. The dream was this: to sail westward across the great ocean, following the setting sun to lands where spices grew like flowers in enchanted gardens. These weren't ordinary spices, but magical ones that could make food taste like sunshine and fill hearts with warmth. The Spice Islands, they were called, floating like emerald jewels in the vast blue sea, somewhere beyond the edge of all known maps. For many years, other brave sailors had tried to reach these mystical islands by sailing eastward around the Horn of Africa, through storms and waves as tall as mountains. But Magellan believed there was another way, a secret passage that would lead them through the great continent to the south, into waters no European had ever seen. It was a dream as fragile as a soap bubble, yet as strong as his determined heart. Night after night, Magellan would sit by his window, watching the stars twinkle like diamonds scattered across velvet cloth. He would trace his finger along old maps, following coastlines that faded into mystery, imagining the gentle splash of waves against unknown shores. The wind would whisper through his window, carrying the salt scent of adventure and the sweet promise of discovery. In those peaceful moments, Magellan could almost see it, ships with white sails billowing like clouds, carrying brave souls across waters that shimmered like liquid starlight. He dreamed of finding a passage through the great southern continent, a waterway that would open like a door to the Pacific Ocean, that vast and peaceful sea whose name meant tranquil. How beautiful it would be to sail those calm waters, with dolphins dancing alongside the ships and seabirds, calling gentle songs from above. Born in Portugal, in the small town of Sabrosa, where vineyards rolled like green carpets over gentle hills, Magellan had grown up listening to tales of the sea told by weathered sailors who gathered in the town's taverns. These men spoke of distant lands where the air was sweet with the perfume of cinnamon and nutmeg, where pearls grew like morning dewdrops in oyster shells, and where golden sunsets painted the sky in colors that had no names. Their stories planted seeds of wanderlust in young Magellan's heart that would grow into the magnificent dream that now consumed his every waking moment. As a young man, Magellan had served his country well, sailing on Portuguese ships to the Indies, where he had seen with his own eyes the treasures that made these voyages worthwhile. He had walked through markets where sacks of pepper were worth more than their weight in silver, where merchants traded in cloves and cinnamon as if they were handling precious gem. The air in those tropical ports was thick with the scents of 1,000 exotic spices, each one carrying promises of flavors that could transform the simplest meal into a feast fit for kings. But Magellan's mind was not content with following paths that others had already carved through the ocean. He studied ancient maps with the devotion of a monk, reading sacred texts, tracing the coastlines with his weathered fingers, and wondering what lay beyond the edges where cartographers had written, "Here be dragons," or simply left the parchment blank. He read the writings of ancient geographers who suggested that the earth was round like a great ball, meaning that a ship could sail west to reach the lands of the east. The more he studied and pondered, the more convinced he became that there must be a western route to the Spice Islands, a passage that would be shorter and safer than the treacherous journey around Africa. He imagined finding a strait through the great landmass of the New World, discovered by Columbus decades earlier, that would lead to the ocean on the other side. This Western Ocean, if it existed, might be smaller and more peaceful than the turbulent Atlantic, making the journey to the Indies a gentle cruise through calm waters. But dreams, even the most wonderful ones, need more than just a dreamer. They need believers, supporters, and most importantly, a king willing to provide ships and supplies for such a grand adventure. Magellan knew that his own country of Portugal would not support his dream, for they preferred their eastern route to the spices. So with a heart full of hope and pockets full of determination, he decided to seek the support of Spain's young King Charles. The decision to leave Portugal and offer his services to Spain was not an easy one, like choosing to leave one's childhood home to seek fortune in distant lands. Magellan packed his few possessions with the care of someone who knew he might never return to see the familiar hills of his birthplace. He carried with him letters of recommendation from friends who believed in his vision, maps that showed the coastlines he hoped to explore, and most precious of all, the unshakable conviction that his dream could become reality. The journey to the Spanish court was like walking through a fairy tale, through countryside painted in soft greens and golds, where sheep grazed peacefully in meadows dotted with wildflowers. Villages slept quietly under thatched roofs, their windows glowing warmly like fireflies in the gathering dusk. Each step brought him closer to the moment when he would share his beautiful dream with the king, when words would either transform into action or fade away like morning mist. Along the way, Magellan stopped at roadside inns where travelers from across Europe gathered to share news and stories. He listened carefully to tales of recent discoveries in the New World, of vast rivers that flowed from unknown sources and mountain ranges that stretched beyond the horizon. Each piece of information was like a small treasure, adding to his understanding of the lands he hoped to explore, and strengthening his belief that a western passage must exist somewhere in that vast, unexplored territory. When Magellan finally stood before King Charles in the grand palace of Valladolid, with its marble columns reaching toward painted ceilings that depicted angels and clouds, he spoke in a voice as gentle as a bedtime story. He told the king about the Western Passage, about the peaceful ocean that lay beyond, about the Spice Islands that waited like sleeping beauties to be awakened by Spanish ships. His words painted pictures of adventure and discovery, of bringing honor and riches to Spain, while opening new chapters in the great book of human knowledge. The palace where this historic meeting took place was itself a wonder, with gardens where fountains sang gentle songs and peacocks displayed their brilliant feathers like living jewels. The walls were decorated with tapestries that told stories of ancient heroes and mythical creatures, while sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on the polished marble floors. It was a place where dreams seemed possible, where grand ideas could take root and grow into reality. The young king listened with growing excitement, his eyes bright with the same wonder that filled children's faces when hearing tales of distant magic kingdoms. Here was a chance for Spain to find its own path to the treasures of the East, to write its name across the ocean in letters of gold and glory. The king's advisors, wise men with long beards and thoughtful expressions, discussed the proposal with the careful consideration it deserved, weighing the potential rewards against the undeniable risks. King Charles was young and ambitious, hungry for discoveries that would bring glory to his reign and prosperity to his kingdom. The Portuguese had grown rich from their eastern trade routes, their ships returning to Lisbon heavy with spices and precious goods that filled royal treasuries with gold. If Magellan was right, if there really was a western route to the Indies, Spain could claim its own share of this lucrative trade, and perhaps even find a faster, safer path to the treasures of the East. After much consideration, surrounded by the wisdom of his advisors and the gentle encouragement of his court, King Charles gave his blessing to Magellan's dream. The decision was announced in the palace's great hall, where courtiers in their finest silks and velvets applauded with the enthusiasm of theater audiences witnessing a particularly moving performance. This was more than just approval for a trading voyage. It was the birth of what would become the most important journey in the history of human exploration. And so it was decided, in that peaceful palace where fountains sang gentle songs and rose gardens filled the air with sweet perfume, that 5 ships would be prepared for the greatest voyage in the history of the world. They would be provisioned with everything needed for a long journey: barrels of fresh water that sparkled like liquid diamonds, sacks of grain that smelled of summer fields, and dried fruits as sweet as candy. The ships would carry tools and weapons, maps and compasses, and most importantly, the dreams and hopes of all who would sail upon them. The preparations for this magnificent expedition would take many months, like preparing for a grand festival that would celebrate human courage and curiosity. Every detail had to be considered, from the type of wood used to repair the ships to the quality of rope that would hold their sails in place during storms. The provisioning alone was an enormous task, calculating how much food and water would be needed for a voyage that might last years to places where resupply might be impossible. Master shipbuilders worked with loving care to ensure that each vessel was as seaworthy as human skill could make them, reinforcing their hulls with the finest timber and covering their bottoms with copper plates that would protect them from the boring worms that lived in tropical waters. Sailmakers stitched canvas with the precision of artists creating masterpieces, knowing that these sails would carry the expedition across thousands of miles of unknown ocean. Each rope and nail, every barrel and tool was chosen with the understanding that the lives of brave men would depend on their quality and reliability. As the preparations began in the bustling port of Seville, Magellan would often stand at the harbor's edge in the gentle evening light, watching the workers prepare his fleet. The 5 ships bobbed peacefully at their moorings like sleeping swans. The Trinidad, his flagship, proud and strong; the San Antonio, large and dependable; the Concepcion, graceful as a dancer; the Victoria, small but determined; and the Santiago, swift as a hummingbird. Each ship was painted in beautiful colors and decorated with flags that fluttered like butterfly wings in the ocean breeze. The Trinidad, chosen as Magellan's flagship, was a vessel of particular beauty and strength, her hull painted in royal blue with golden trim that caught the sunlight like captured fire. Her figurehead was carved in the shape of an angel with outstretched wings, as if blessing the waters ahead and protecting all who sailed beneath her watch. The ship's cabin was fitted with the finest furnishings that Spanish craftsmen could create, providing a comfortable home for Magellan during the long months at sea that lay ahead. The crews that would sail these magnificent vessels came from many lands, speaking different languages but united by the same sense of wonder and adventure. There were Spanish sailors with weathered hands and kind eyes, Portuguese navigators who could read the stars like a favorite book, and Italian craftsmen whose skills would keep the ships sailing smoothly. Each man brought his own dreams aboard, creating a floating community of hopes and aspirations that would face whatever challenges the ocean might present. Among these brave souls were master carpenters who could repair any damage to the wooden ships, cooks who could create delicious meals from preserved ingredients, and doctors who carried knowledge of healing that might save lives in distant places where no help could be found. There were priests to provide spiritual comfort and guidance, scribes to record the discoveries they would make, and artists to capture the beauty of new lands in drawings and paintings. Each man had been carefully chosen for his skills and his courage, creating a crew that could handle any challenge their great adventure might present. The Spanish sailors brought with them the warmth and passion of their sunny homeland, their voices rich with songs that spoke of love and adventure, of distant mountains and fields of golden wheat that danced in summer breezes. The Portuguese navigators carried the wisdom of a seafaring nation, their knowledge of winds and currents earned through generations of brave ancestors who had pushed back the boundaries of the known world. The Italian craftsmen possessed skills passed down through families of artists and builders, their hands capable of creating beauty and functionality from the simplest materials. As the final preparations were made, Magellan spent quiet hours walking among his ships, running his gentle hands along their wooden rails, whispering soft prayers for their safety and success. The ships seemed to listen, their masts swaying slightly in the evening breeze as if nodding their understanding. Soon, very soon, they would carry their human cargo away from the familiar shores of Spain, out into the vast unknown where adventures waited like unopened presents. The loading of supplies was a careful and methodical process, with each item stored according to its importance and the likelihood of its need during different phases of the voyage. Barrels of salt, pork, and hardtack were packed deep in the ship's holds, along with sacks of grain that could be cooked into nourishing porridge during long weeks at sea. Wine and fresh water were stored in specially prepared casks, while dried fruits and nuts provided variety to what would otherwise be a monotonous diet during the months of ocean crossing. Trading goods filled another portion of each ship's cargo space. Mirrors and beads, colorful cloth, and small metal tools that could be exchanged with indigenous peoples for food, information, and friendship. These items were chosen not for their intrinsic value, but for their beauty and novelty, things that might delight people who had never seen European craftsmanship and open doors to peaceful communication and mutual understanding. Gold and silver coins were also packed away, carefully guarded treasures that could purchase supplies or safe passage in established ports. Navigation instruments were treated with special care, wrapped in silk and stored in waterproof containers that would protect them from salt spray and rough weather. Compasses that would point toward magnetic north, astrolabes that could measure the height of stars above the horizon, and hourglasses that would mark the passage of time were all essential tools for finding their way across trackless oceans. Charts and maps, though incomplete and sometimes inaccurate, provided the best available knowledge of coastlines and currents, wind patterns, and safe harbors. Weapons were included not for conquest but for protection, should the expedition encounter hostile peoples or dangerous animals in unknown lands. Swords and crossbows, armor and gunpowder were carefully stored and maintained, though Magellan hoped that diplomacy and friendship would make their use unnecessary. The goal of this voyage was discovery and trade, not warfare, and every effort would be made to approach new peoples with open hands and peaceful intentions. On the eve of departure, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink that painted the harbor waters in watercolor hues, Magellan stood on the deck of the Trinidad and looked back at the city that had embraced his dream. Seville glowed softly in the twilight, its church bells ringing gentle evening songs that drifted across the water like lullabies. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of an adventure beyond imagination, but tonight was for peaceful reflection and grateful hearts. The crew members spent this final evening writing letters to loved ones they might not see for years, if ever again, their words filled with love and hope rather than fear or sadness. They packed personal treasures carefully away, lockets containing portraits of sweethearts, religious medals blessed by priests, and small mementos of home that would provide comfort during the long months ahead. Some gathered on deck to sing the songs of their homeland, their voices blending in harmonies that seemed to rise toward the stars like prayers made of music. The stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, the same stars that would guide them across unknown waters to lands beyond the sunset. Magellan smiled as he watched them twinkle, knowing that each point of light was like a friendly beacon, promising to watch over the little fleet as it sailed toward its destiny. The ocean lapped gently against the ship's hulls, singing soft songs of welcome and adventure, preparing to carry them on the journey of a lifetime. In the distance, the lighthouse of Seville cast its beam across the harbor waters, a final reminder of the civilization they were leaving behind in pursuit of their magnificent dream. The beam swept across the 5 ships like a benediction, blessing their departure and wishing them safe return with the treasures and knowledge they hoped to find. Tomorrow, when the sun rose over the Atlantic Ocean, this harbor would seem like a memory from another world, and their great adventure would truly begin. When dawn broke on September 20th, 1519, it painted the sky in soft pastels of rose and gold, as if the heavens themselves were celebrating the beginning of the great adventure. The harbor of Seville awakened slowly, like a child stirring from sweet dreams, with gentle waves lapping against stone walls and seabirds calling their morning songs. The 5 ships of Magellan's fleet floated peacefully at their moorings, their sails furled like sleeping wings, ready to spread and catch the winds of destiny. Magellan stood on the deck of his flagship Trinidad, breathing in the sweet morning air that carried the scents of orange blossoms and sea salt. His crew moved quietly about the ship, making final preparations with the gentle efficiency of those who truly loved the sea. There was something magical about this moment, as if the whole world was holding its breath in anticipation of the wonders that lay ahead. The morning light revealed every detail of the magnificent fleet with crystalline clarity, from the proud figurehead of the Trinidad to the smallest rope and pulley on the swift Santiago. Each ship represented months of careful preparation, skilled craftsmanship, and the dreams of everyone who had contributed to making this expedition possible. The flags of Spain fluttered proudly from their masts, while pennants in bright colors added festive touches that made the ships look like participants in a grand celebration. The townspeople of Seville had gathered along the waterfront to bid farewell to the brave explorers, their faces filled with the same wonder that children feel when watching shooting stars. They waved colorful handkerchiefs and called out blessings in voices soft as summer rain, sending love and hope with the ships that would carry Spanish dreams across unknown waters. Church bells rang gentle melodies across the harbor, their bronze voices joining in a song of farewell and good fortune. Among the crowd were merchants who had invested in the expedition, hoping for returns that would make them wealthy beyond imagination. There were wives and sweethearts of the sailors, their eyes bright with tears that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun, yet their smiles showing pride in their men's courage and determination. Children pressed close to the harbor's edge, their faces filled with excitement at seeing the great ships that would sail beyond the edge of their world. Priests in their flowing robes offered final blessings, sprinkling holy water on the ships and crew while chanting prayers in Latin that seemed to rise toward heaven like incense. The Bishop of Seville himself had come to witness this historic departure, his presence lending additional weight to the solemnity and importance of the moment. Local nobles in their finest clothing stood quietly, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be remembered for centuries to come. As the morning sun climbed higher, painting the water in shades of liquid gold, Magellan gave the order to unfurl the sails. The canvas caught the wind with a sound like gentle sighs, billowing outward like the wings of great white birds preparing for flight. One by one, the 5 ships began to move, gliding through the water as smoothly as swans on a peaceful lake, leaving trails of silver foam in their wake. The sight of the 5 ships beginning their journey was breathtakingly beautiful, like watching a painting come to life. The Trinidad led the way, her blue hull cutting through the golden water while her white sails caught every breath of the morning breeze. Behind her came the San Antonio, the largest ship in the fleet, her broad beam and sturdy construction promising reliability during the long months ahead. The Concepcion followed with the grace that had earned her the nickname the Dancer, her sleek lines and responsive handling making her a joy to sail even in challenging conditions. The Victoria, though small, moved through the water with determined efficiency, every line of her construction speaking of seaworthiness and reliability. The Santiago, smallest and fastest of the fleet, darted through the water like a dolphin at play, her crew already working with the smooth precision that would make her invaluable for scouting and reconnaissance. The Trinidad led the way, followed by her sister ships in a formation as graceful as a dance. Behind them, the coastline of Spain grew smaller and smaller until the familiar landmarks became just gentle smudges on the horizon. Ahead stretched the vast Atlantic Ocean, its surface sparkling with 1,000,000 diamonds of sunlight, promising adventures beyond imagination. As the ships cleared the mouth of the Guadalquivir River and entered the open Atlantic, the crew felt the first taste of the ocean swells that would be their constant companion for months to come. The gentle rise and fall of the ships on the waves was like being rocked in nature's own cradle, a rhythm that experienced sailors found as comforting as a mother's lullaby. The salt spray that occasionally kissed their faces was cool and refreshing, carrying with it the promise of distant lands and new discoveries. The wind filled their sails with a steady, reliable pressure that pushed them steadily away from the familiar coast of Europe. This was the trade wind, nature's own highway across the Atlantic, a river of air that had carried Columbus to the New World and would now carry Magellan's fleet toward their own date with destiny. The sailors adjusted their rigging with practiced hands, trimming their sails to catch every breath of wind while keeping their ships sailing safely in formation. For the first weeks of their journey, the fleet sailed southward along the coast of Africa, following routes that had been traveled by many sailors before them. The days passed peacefully, with gentle breezes filling their sails and dolphins playing in their bow waves, leaping and dancing as if celebrating the ship's passage. Each evening, the sun would set in a blaze of colors that painted the sky like an artist's masterpiece, while the ocean reflected the beauty back like a mirror made of liquid starlight. The African coast revealed itself to be a land of incredible diversity and beauty, with golden beaches that stretched for miles beneath cliffs that rose like ancient fortresses from the sea. Palm trees leaned gracefully over the water's edge, their fronds rustling with sounds like gentle applause, while exotic birds with brilliant plumage flew overhead in formations that seemed choreographed by nature itself. The air carried scents that were completely foreign to European nostrils: unfamiliar flowers, mysterious spices, and the green smell of tropical vegetation that had never known winter's touch. Fishing villages appeared along the coast like scattered pearls, their inhabitants waving from the beaches as the great ships passed by. Smoke from cooking fires rose straight into the still air, while children ran along the shoreline, calling out in languages that sounded like music to the sailors' ears. These glimpses of human life in this exotic land reminded the crew that the world was vast and filled with different peoples, each living their own unique way of life under the same sun and stars. The crew settled into the rhythm of life at sea, a gentle routine that connected them to the eternal dance of wind and wave. During the day, they would maintain the ships with loving care, mending sails that fluttered like butterfly wings and polishing brass fittings until they gleamed like golden treasures. In the evenings, they would gather on deck to share stories and songs, their voices harmonizing with the gentle splash of waves against the hull. Each morning brought its own small rituals and pleasures. The cook preparing a breakfast of hardtack and salt pork that somehow tasted delicious when eaten on deck in the fresh sea air. The navigator taking readings with his instruments, carefully plotting their position on charts that showed the African coast in remarkable detail. The lookouts climbing to the crow's nests high above the deck, where they could scan the horizon for signs of weather, land, or other ships. Magellan spent his days moving among the ships, checking on his crews and ensuring that all was well with their floating homes. He would often be found standing at the bow of the Trinidad, his kind eyes scanning the horizon for signs of weather or land, his heart full of gratitude for the beauty that surrounded them. The ocean seemed to welcome them with open arms, providing fair winds and calm seas for their journey toward the unknown. The Portuguese navigator Antonio Pigafetta, who had joined the expedition to document their discoveries, spent his days writing detailed accounts of everything they saw and experienced. His journal would become one of the most important historical documents ever created, preserving for future generations the wonder and excitement of this first circumnavigation of the globe. He wrote with the passion of someone who understood that he was witnessing history being made, capturing not just facts but the emotions and sensations of their incredible journey. As they sailed past the Canary Islands, those emerald gems scattered in the blue Atlantic like stepping stones to adventure, the crew felt a sense of wonder at how small they were in the vast ocean. Yet there was no fear in their hearts, only excitement for the mysteries that awaited them beyond the horizon. Each island they passed looked like a sleeping giant, covered in green vegetation that swayed gently in the ocean breezes. The Canary Islands were a final taste of European civilization before they ventured into truly unknown waters. Here they could take on fresh water and supplies, trade with merchants who spoke familiar languages, and send final letters home to loved ones who might not hear from them again for years. The islands were populated by descendants of Spanish settlers who had made these volcanic peaks their home, creating gardens of incredible beauty where fruits and flowers from around the world grew in tropical abundance. The trade winds carried them steadily southward, past the coast of Africa, where golden beaches stretched endlessly and palm trees waved their fronds like gentle hands, bidding them farewell. Flying fish would sometimes glide alongside the ships, their silver bodies catching the sunlight as they soared above the waves like living jewels. Whales would surface in the distance, their great spouts of water rising like silver fountains against the blue sky, reminding the sailors of the magnificent creatures that shared their ocean home. The weather during this portion of their voyage was consistently beautiful, with trade winds that filled their sails day after day, and skies that remained clear, except for occasional puffy white clouds that provided welcome shade from the tropical sun. The temperature grew warmer as they sailed south, and the crew began to shed the heavy woolen clothing they had worn when departing from Spain's autumn weather. Cotton shirts and lightweight pants became the uniform of the day, while broad-brimmed hats protected them from the increasingly intense sunlight. At night, when the ships sailed under blankets of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Magellan would take readings with his navigation instruments, calculating their position with the patience of a master craftsman. The stars were his friends and guides, each constellation telling stories of ancient voyagers who had looked up at the same celestial lights. The Southern Cross began to appear in their night sky, a beautiful star pattern that would guide them toward lands no European had ever seen. The night watches became times of special beauty and contemplation, when sailors would stand at the bow of their ships and marvel at the phosphorescence that sometimes made their wake glow like a trail of liquid starlight. The ocean seemed alive with mysterious lights, tiny organisms that sparkled and shimmered in response to the ship's passage through their watery world. Dolphins would sometimes swim alongside the ships at night, their bodies creating streams of glowing bubbles that made them look like mythical creatures from ancient legends. As they crossed the equator, the crew celebrated with gentle festivities, decorating the ships with colorful banners and sharing special meals prepared by cooks who had learned to create wonderful dishes from their preserved provisions. The ocean here was a deeper blue than they had ever seen, so clear that they could watch tropical fish swimming in schools that moved like living rainbows beneath the surface. Gentle rain showers would pass over them like blessings, filling their water barrels and washing the ships clean. The crossing of the equator was marked by traditional ceremonies that sailors had observed for generations, rituals designed to welcome those who had never before entered the southern hemisphere. The crew created elaborate costumes from scraps of cloth and rope, transforming ordinary sailors into mythical figures representing Neptune and his court. The celebration was filled with laughter and good-natured pranks, building the camaraderie that would be essential during the challenges that lay ahead. The journey across the Atlantic took many peaceful weeks, during which the crew grew closer together, like members of a large family sharing an extraordinary adventure. They learned each other's languages and customs, sharing stories of their homelands and dreams of what they might discover in the new world. Spanish sailors taught Portuguese navigators their favorite songs, while Italian craftsmen showed everyone new ways to repair equipment using materials from their floating workshop. The multinational character of the crew created a rich tapestry of human experience aboard each ship, with different cultures and traditions blending together to create something entirely new. Men who had been strangers when they departed from Seville became brothers in adventure, bound together by their shared commitment to the success of their historic mission. They shared their skills generously, teaching each other knots and splices, navigation techniques, and methods for keeping equipment in good repair during long voyages. When storms did come, they were faced with the calm courage that comes from complete trust in one's ship and companions. The 5 vessels would ride the waves like graceful dancers, their experienced crews working together with the smooth precision of a well-rehearsed ballet. Even in rough weather, there was something beautiful about watching the ships move through the waters, their masts swaying in rhythm with the ocean's ancient song. The Atlantic storms were magnificent displays of nature's power, with towering waves that lifted the ships toward the racing clouds before lowering them gently into valleys of green water. Lightning would illuminate the turbulent seascape in brilliant flashes that revealed every detail of wind-whipped sails and spray-soaked decks. Thunder rolled across the water like the voices of sea gods, while the wind sang through the rigging with notes that ranged from gentle whispers to powerful roars. Finally, after what seemed like a dream of endless blue horizons, a cry rang out from the lookout on the Trinidad, "Land ho!" The crew rushed to the rails to see the coast of South America rising from the sea like a green paradise, its beaches golden in the afternoon sun and its forests dark with mystery and promise. This was the New World, the land of wonders that Columbus had found decades earlier, now welcoming Magellan's fleet with the gentle beauty of an untouched paradise. As they approached the coast near what is now Brazil, the ships sailed through waters that seemed to glow with an inner light, so clear and blue that they could see tropical fish swimming far below, like living jewels in an underwater garden. The air filled with new scents, exotic flowers, mysterious spices, and the green smell of vast forests that stretched beyond the horizon. Brightly colored birds flew overhead, their calls adding new melodies to the symphony of their adventure. The Brazilian coastline was even more magnificent than any of the crew had imagined, with endless beaches of white sand that sparkled like crushed pearls in the tropical sunlight. Behind the beaches rose forests so thick and green they seemed like walls of emeralds, with trees taller than the masts of their ships reaching toward the sky like natural cathedrals. Rivers flowed from these forests into the sea, their fresh water creating deltas where thousands of exotic birds gathered to feed and nest. The fleet anchored in a protected bay where the water was as calm as a mountain lake, surrounded by beaches of white sand that sparkled like crushed pearls. Palm trees leaned over the water's edge as if trying to greet the visitors from across the ocean, their fronds rustling with sounds like gentle applause. Here they would rest and resupply their ships, preparing for the next phase of their incredible journey. The bay they had chosen for their anchorage was a natural harbor of incredible beauty, protected from ocean swells by a chain of small islands covered in tropical vegetation. The water was so clear they could see colorful fish swimming around the coral formations that dotted the seafloor like underwater gardens. Schools of dolphins played in the deeper channels, while sea turtles surfaced occasionally to breathe, their ancient eyes watching the strange ships with calm curiosity. Local inhabitants appeared along the shoreline, watching the strange vessels with the same wonder that the sailors felt looking at this new land. These were gentle people with kind faces and curious eyes, dressed in simple clothes and decorated with colorful feathers and beads that caught the sunlight. Through gestures and smiles, the two groups began to communicate, sharing gifts and friendship across the bridge of human kindness that connects all people regardless of where they come from. The indigenous people of Brazil were unlike anyone the Europeans had ever encountered, with golden skin that seemed to glow in the tropical sunlight and hair decorated with feathers of every color imaginable. They moved with a natural grace that spoke of lives, lived in harmony with the forest and sea, their eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity about these visitors from across the great water. Their villages were built along the beach and among the trees, constructed from natural materials in ways that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. The first meetings between the two cultures were filled with mutual wonder and respect. as representatives from both groups approached each other with the cautious curiosity of children making new friends. The indigenous people brought gifts of tropical fruits and beautifully woven baskets, while the sailors offered mirrors, beads, and small metal tools that glittered like magic in the hands of people who had never seen European craftsmanship. Neither group spoke the other's language, but smiles and gestures proved to be a universal tongue that needed no translation. The sailors traded small items from Europe for fresh fruits that tasted like sunshine and clean water that sparkled like liquid crystal. They learned to appreciate foods they had never tasted before, sweet tropical fruits that burst with juice, vegetables that grew in ways they had never seen, and fresh fish prepared with local herbs that made each meal a delicious adventure. This was more than just resupplying their ships. It was their first taste of the wonders that awaited them in this new world. Pineapples, which the sailors had never seen before, became an immediate favorite with their sweet, tangy flavor that seemed to capture the essence of tropical sunshine. Coconuts provided both refreshing milk and sweet white meat, while their hard shells could be fashioned into useful cups and bowls. Mangoes dripped with golden juice that stained fingers and clothes, but was so delicious that no one minded the mess, and papayas offered flesh so soft and sweet it seemed like eating candied sunshine. The indigenous people showed the sailors how to prepare cassava root, a staple food that could be ground into flour and baked into bread that would keep well during long sea voyages. They demonstrated techniques for catching fish using nets woven from plant fibers and showed them which fruits and plants were safe to eat and which should be avoided. This knowledge was invaluable to men who would be sailing into unknown waters, where the ability to find safe food and fresh water might mean the difference between life and death. The ship's carpenters took advantage of this peaceful interlude to repair any damage that had occurred during their Atlantic crossing, using tools and techniques that fascinated their indigenous hosts. They replaced worn rigging with fresh rope, patched small holes in the hulls, and reinforced joints that had worked loose during storms. The indigenous people watched these activities with great interest, their natural curiosity leading them to help where they could and learn about European methods of shipbuilding and maintenance. Fresh water was taken aboard in quantities that would last for many weeks, stored in barrels that had been carefully cleaned and treated to keep the water sweet during long periods at sea. Tropical fruits were dried in the hot sun to preserve them for the voyage ahead, while others were packed in salt or stored in ways the local people had taught them. The ship's holds began to fill with the bounty of this new land, provisions that would sustain them during the long searches that lay ahead. As the days passed peacefully in this tropical paradise, Magellan and his crews prepared for the most challenging part of their voyage. Ahead lay the vast coastline of South America, somewhere along which they hoped to find the passage that would lead them to the Pacific Ocean. It was a dream that required patience, courage, and faith in the unknown, but surrounded by the beauty of this new land and the friendship of its people, they felt ready for whatever adventures awaited them. The crew spent their evenings on the beaches, gathering around fires built from driftwood and fragrant tropical hardwoods that filled the air with sweet smoke. They shared stories with their new friends, using drawings in the sand and gestures to communicate tales of their homeland and the great journey that had brought them across the ocean. Music was a common language that needed no translation, as European melodies blended with indigenous rhythms to create something entirely new and beautiful. Some of the younger sailors learned to dance the traditional dances of their hosts, their European steps adapting to rhythms that spoke of rainforests and ocean waves, of hunting and fishing and celebrations under tropical stars. In return, they taught their new friends Spanish and Portuguese songs, melodies that spoke of olive groves and vineyards, of castles on hills and lovers waiting by harbor walls. These cultural exchanges enriched both groups, creating memories that would be treasured long after the ships had sailed away. After their peaceful rest in the tropical paradise of Brazil, Magellan's fleet bid farewell to their new friends and set sail southward along the coast of South America, following the shoreline like children, following a path through an enchanted forest. The 5 ships moved gracefully through waters that changed color from the bright turquoise of shallow bays to the deep sapphire blue of the open ocean. Each day brought new wonders, coastlines that curved and twisted like the pages of a fascinating storybook, islands that appeared like green jewels scattered across the sea, and beaches where waves whispered gentle secrets to the shore. The departure from Brazil was bittersweet, marked by genuine sadness from both the sailors and their indigenous friends who had grown to care for each other during their weeks together. The local people gathered on the beaches to wave farewell, their colorful feathers and beads creating a rainbow of color against the white sand. They had filled the ship's boats with final gifts of fruit and fresh water, pressing small carved tokens into the sailors' hands as remembrances of their time together in paradise. As the ships sailed away from the Brazilian coast, the crew could see smoke rising from farewell fires built by their friends, signals that would be visible for many miles out to sea. The wind carried the scents of tropical flowers and exotic spices, a fragrant farewell from a land that had welcomed them with open arms. Some of the sailors wept openly as they watched the coastline fade into the distance, knowing they might never again see this beautiful place or the kind people who had shared their home with strangers from across the ocean. The search for the passage to the Pacific Ocean was like looking for a hidden door in a vast, beautiful wall. Every bay they explored might be the one, every river mouth could lead to the waterway of their dreams. The crew approached each new discovery with the excitement of treasure hunters, carefully mapping every inlet and recording every detail in their journals, creating a record of wonders that future explorers would treasure like precious gems. The South American coastline revealed itself to be incredibly diverse, changing character as they sailed further south. Sometimes they found themselves sailing past endless beaches backed by grasslands that stretched to the horizon, where wild horses ran in herds and exotic birds built their nests in tall grasses that swayed like wheat in an ocean breeze. Other times the coast was rocky and dramatic, with cliffs that rose directly from the sea and created natural harbors where the water was deep and protected from ocean swells. Each promising inlet required careful investigation, with small boats being lowered from the ships to explore channels that might lead to interior waterways. These scouting expeditions were adventures in themselves, as crews rowed up rivers that wound through landscapes of incredible beauty, past forests filled with unknown birds and animals, through marshlands where exotic flowers bloomed in profusion. The men who undertook these explorations returned with stories of wonders that seemed too fantastic to believe: trees as large as castles, birds with feathers more brilliant than jewels, and waters so clear they could see fish swimming at depths that seemed impossible. As they sailed further south, the weather began to change, growing cooler as they left the warm tropical regions behind. The ocean took on different moods, sometimes calm as a sleeping child, other times choppy with waves that danced and played around the ships like playful dolphins. The crew adapted to these changes with the easy grace of experienced sailors, adjusting their sails and their routines to match the ocean's gentle rhythms. The changing seasons brought new challenges and new beauty to their journey. The tropical birds that had followed them from Brazil gradually gave way to different species adapted to cooler climates, while the lush green vegetation of the coast became more sparse and hardy. The water itself took on different qualities, sometimes crystal clear and blue-green in protected bays, other times dark and mysterious where deep ocean currents flowed close to shore. Along the way, they encountered many indigenous peoples, each group unique and wonderful in their own way. Some lived in villages built right on the water's edge, with houses that seemed to float like lily pads on the calm surface of protected lagoons. Others dwelt in the forests that came right down to the shore, emerging from among the trees like characters from a fairy tale to watch the strange ships pass by. Each meeting was an opportunity for friendship and wonder as the two groups of people shared their different ways of seeing the world. The indigenous peoples of Argentina proved to be skilled fishermen and hunters, living in harmony with the rich ecosystems of coast and pampa. They built their homes from materials provided by their environment: grasses woven into weatherproof walls, animal hides stretched over wooden frames, and roofs designed to shed the occasional rains while providing shelter from the constant winds. Their boats were marvels of practical engineering, constructed from materials that might seem inadequate to European eyes, but which proved perfectly suited to local conditions. The coast of Argentina unfolded before them like a scroll being slowly opened, revealing new landscapes with each passing day. They sailed past cliffs that rose from the sea like ancient castles, their faces carved by wind and waves into fantastic shapes that sparked the imagination. Seabirds nested in these rocky heights, their calls echoing across the water like songs of welcome, while seals basked peacefully on rocky ledges, watching the ships pass with curious, gentle eyes. The wildlife along this coast was abundant and diverse, with whales that surfaced close to the ships, their enormous bodies creating spouts of water that sparkled in the sunlight like liquid diamonds. Penguins appeared in large groups, their formal black and white appearance making them look like small gentlemen attending a grand ball on the rocky shores. Sea lions barked their greetings from rookeries built on protected beaches, while countless varieties of seabirds filled the air with their calls and the graceful beauty of their flight. Winter was approaching in the southern hemisphere, and Magellan knew that his fleet would need to find a safe harbor where they could wait out the cold months. They sailed into a large bay that they named Port San Julian, a protected anchorage surrounded by low hills covered in hardy grasses that waved like a soft carpet in the wind. Here, the ships could rest safely while the crew explored the surrounding lands and prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. Port San Julian was a natural harbor of remarkable beauty and practicality, with deep water close to shore and protection from the storms that frequently swept across the southern Atlantic. The surrounding landscape was austere but beautiful in its own way, with rolling hills covered in grass that turned golden in the autumn sun, and streams that flowed with clear, fresh water perfect for replenishing their supplies. The bay itself was home to countless seabirds and marine animals, providing opportunities for fresh food to supplement their preserved provisions. The winter at Port San Julian was a time of both rest and discovery, as the crew adapted to life in this remote corner of the world. The crew spent their days maintaining their ships with loving care, repairing any damage from their long journey and preparing for the adventures still to come. They built temporary shelters on shore where they could work on larger projects, creating a little community that bridged the gap between land and sea. The temporary settlement they established on shore included workshops where the ship's carpenters could undertake major repairs, sailmakers could mend and replace worn canvas, and rope makers could splice and weave new rigging. A blacksmith's forge was set up using stones from the beach, where metal tools could be repaired and new ones crafted from materials salvaged from their supplies. Gardens were planted with seeds they had brought from Europe, though the harsh climate and poor soil made growing fresh vegetables a challenging endeavor. During this peaceful winter, they encountered the tall people of Patagonia, whom they called Patagonians because of their large feet. These gentle giants were unlike any people the Europeans had ever seen, standing nearly 7 feet tall with kind faces and curious natures. They wore cloaks made from the soft fur of animals that roamed the grasslands, and they moved with a grace that seemed almost magical, as if they were dancing even when they walked. The Patagonians were a nomadic people who followed the herds of guanaco and other animals across the vast grasslands that stretched beyond the horizon. Their temporary camps were marvels of practical engineering, designed to be quickly assembled and disassembled as they moved with the seasons. Their weapons were beautifully crafted, with bolas made from stones wrapped in leather that could bring down running animals with deadly accuracy, and bows carved from wood that could send arrows farther than European crossbows. The meetings between the sailors and the Patagonians were filled with wonder and friendship as representatives from both cultures approached each other with the cautious curiosity of people making contact across vast differences in language and custom. Through gestures and drawings in the sand, they shared stories of their different worlds, learning about each other's ways of life with the patience and kindness that comes from genuine curiosity. The Patagonians taught the sailors about the land they called home, showing them which plants could be eaten and where fresh water could be found, while the sailors shared tales of their journey from across the great ocean. The cultural exchanges during this winter were remarkable for their depth and mutual respect. The Patagonians demonstrated their hunting techniques, showing the sailors how to track animals across the grasslands and how to read the subtle signs that revealed the presence of game. They shared their knowledge of the weather patterns that swept across these southern lands, teaching the Europeans to recognize the signs of approaching storms and the seasonal changes that governed life in this remote region. In return, the sailors shared their own skills and knowledge, demonstrating European methods of metalworking, navigation, and shipbuilding that fascinated their hosts. They showed the Patagonians how their compasses worked, how they calculated their position using the stars, and how they predicted tides and weather using instruments and techniques developed over centuries of European seafaring. These exchanges enriched both cultures, creating friendships that transcended the barriers of language and custom. As winter slowly gave way to spring, the crew prepared to continue their search for the passage to the Pacific. They had spent months in this peaceful place, but their dreams still called to them from beyond the southern horizon. The ships were cleaned and provisioned, their sails mended, and their equipment checked with the thoroughness of craftsmen preparing their finest work. The departure from Port San Julian was delayed by a serious crisis that tested the unity and resolve of the expedition. Some of the Spanish captains, led by Juan de Cartagena, had grown increasingly unhappy with Magellan's leadership and his determination to continue the search for a western passage. They attempted to take control of several ships and turn the expedition back towards Spain, creating a mutiny that threatened to destroy everything they had worked so hard to achieve. Magellan handled this crisis with the wisdom and firmness of an experienced leader, using a combination of diplomacy and decisive action to restore order to his fleet. He reminded the mutineers of their oath to the Spanish crown and their commitment to the mission they had undertaken, while also demonstrating that he would not hesitate to use force if necessary to protect the expedition. In the end, order was restored, though not without cost, and the fleet was once again united in its determination to find the passage to the Pacific. When they finally left Port San Julian, sailing south into waters that grew colder and more challenging with each passing day, the crew felt a mixture of excitement and anticipation. They were entering waters that no European had ever seen, following a coastline that twisted and turned like a path through a mysterious landscape of fjords and channels. The scenery was breathtaking, snow-capped mountains that rose directly from the sea, glaciers that gleamed like silver in the pale sunlight, and waters so clear they could see straight to the bottom. The landscape of southern South America was unlike anything in European experience, with a stark, dramatic beauty that took their breath away. Towering peaks covered in snow and ice rose directly from the ocean, their reflection creating perfect mirror images in the calm waters of protected fjords. Glaciers flowed down from these heights like frozen rivers, their blue-white ice creating formations of incredible beauty and strangeness. The Santiago, their smallest and swiftest ship, was sent ahead to explore the most promising inlets and channels. Like a bird scouting the path for its flock, it would investigate each possibility before the larger ships committed to following dangerous or dead-end passages. This careful approach saved them time and kept them safe, though it also meant that progress was sometimes as slow as a gentle walk through a garden. The work of exploration in these treacherous waters required all the skill and courage that the expedition could muster. The channels between the islands and along the coast were often narrow and filled with hidden rocks that could tear the bottom out of a ship. Tides were extreme in this region, with water levels that could change by 20 feet or more between high and low tide, turning safe passages into deadly traps in a matter of hours. One day, as they were exploring a particularly promising inlet, disaster struck the brave little Santiago. Caught in a sudden storm while investigating a narrow channel, the ship was driven onto the rocks and damaged beyond repair. But, in a stroke of good fortune that seemed almost magical, all of the crew were rescued safely, and much of the ship's supplies were salvaged by brave sailors who worked tirelessly in dangerous conditions. The wreck of the Santiago was a sobering reminder of the dangers they faced in these uncharted waters, where sudden storms could appear without warning and hidden rocks lurked beneath the surface of seemingly safe channels. The rescue operation was a masterpiece of seamanship and courage, as boats from the other ships battled treacherous currents and breaking waves to reach the stranded crew. Working in shifts around the clock, they managed to save not only every man aboard the Santiago, but also most of her supplies and equipment. The loss of the Santiago was deeply felt by the entire fleet, like losing a beloved family member. But the courage and skill shown during the rescue reminded everyone of the strength that comes from working together, from caring for one another as they pursued their shared dream. The survivors were divided among the 4 remaining ships, where they were welcomed with the warmth reserved for heroes returning from a great adventure. As the southern spring progressed into summer, the remaining 4 ships continued their search along the increasingly dramatic coastline. The land here was wild and beautiful, with fjords that cut deep into snow-covered mountains and islands scattered like stepping stones across waters that reflected the sky like mirrors. Each new bay or channel might be the one they were looking for. Each turn around a rocky headland might reveal the passage that would change the world forever. The crew had learned to read the subtle signs of the sea and sky, understanding how the color of the water might indicate depth, how the behavior of seabirds might reveal the presence of land beyond the horizon. They worked together with the easy coordination of a symphony orchestra, each person playing their part in the complex music of exploration and discovery. Their ships moved through the water like dancers performing an ancient ballet, graceful and purposeful in their search for the hidden passage. The indigenous peoples of this southern region were different from any they had encountered before, adapted to the harsh conditions of wind and cold that characterized this land at the bottom of the world. They lived in small groups that moved constantly along the coast and among the islands, traveling in boats made from bark and animal skins that seemed impossibly fragile, yet proved perfectly suited to these treacherous waters. Their skill in navigating these channels and their knowledge of local conditions made them invaluable allies when peaceful contact could be established. Then, on a day when the southern sun cast long shadows across the water and painted the sky in soft shades of gold and pink, they saw something that made their hearts race with excitement. Ahead of them, the coastline seemed to open up into a wide channel that stretched far into the distance, bordered by towering cliffs and snow-covered peaks. This looked different from all the other inlets they had explored, broader, deeper, and filled with the promise of leading somewhere truly special. As they sailed into this promising waterway, the crew felt a sense of anticipation that was almost magical. Could this finally be the passage they had been seeking for so long? The water was deep and clear, the channel wide enough for their ships to sail comfortably, and ahead in the distance, The passage seemed to continue beyond their sight, promising to lead them to the ocean of their dreams. The waterway that opened before Magellan's fleet was unlike anything they had ever seen, stretching ahead of them like a liquid highway between towering mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The water was deep and dark, reflecting the snow-capped peaks that rose on either side like the walls of a magnificent cathedral built by nature itself. Magellan named this passage the Strait of All Saints, for they had discovered it on November Honest, the day when all the saints are honored, and it seemed fitting that such a miracle would occur on such a blessed day. The entrance to the strait was marked by dramatic headlands that rose like ancient sentinels from the churning waters where Atlantic swells met the calmer waters of the passage. Seabirds wheeled overhead in great spirals, their cries echoing off the rocky cliffs as if announcing the arrival of the first European ships ever to enter these sacred waters. The very air seemed different here, charged with the electricity of discovery and the promise of wonders yet to be revealed. As the 4 remaining ships, Trinidad, San Antonio, Concepcion, and Victoria, sailed deeper into the strait, they found themselves in a world that seemed carved from dreams and starlight. Glaciers flowed down from the mountains like frozen rivers of blue and white, their surfaces glittering in the pale sunlight like crushed diamonds scattered across silk. Waterfalls cascaded from impossible heights, their mists creating rainbow bridges that seemed to welcome the explorers into this magical realm. The mountains that flanked the strait were unlike anything the Europeans had ever seen, rising directly from the water to heights that disappeared into the clouds. Their peaks were covered in snow that never melted, while their lower slopes were clothed in forests of trees that had never felt an axe's bite. The scale of everything in this place dwarfed human understanding, making the ships and their crews seem like toys in a giant's playground. The passage twisted and turned like a gentle river, flowing through an enchanted valley, sometimes wide enough that the opposite shore seemed distant and mysterious, other times so narrow that the sailors felt they could almost reach out and touch the rocky walls on either side. Each bend revealed new wonders, hidden coves where the water was as still as glass, reflecting the mountains and sky so perfectly that it was hard to tell where reality ended and its reflection began. Seabirds nested in the cliffs above, their calls echoing through the narrow passage like songs of encouragement. The water in the strait had a different quality than the ocean they had left behind, sometimes appearing almost black in the deep channels, other times glowing with an inner light that seemed to come from the glacial streams that fed into it. Ice floes occasionally drifted past the ships like floating sculptures, their surfaces carved by wind and wave into fantastic shapes that sparked the imagination. The temperature was noticeably cooler here, requiring the crew to don warmer clothing and build fires in braziers to keep themselves comfortable during the long hours of navigation. The indigenous people who lived in this remarkable land traveled in small boats made of bark and animal skins, moving through the water with the grace of dancers performing on a liquid stage. They would appear suddenly from hidden inlets, their boats loaded with curious passengers who watched the great ships with wonder in their dark eyes. These were the Fuegians, people of the fire, named for the many small fires they kept burning along the shore, tiny points of warm light that twinkled like earthbound stars in the gathering dusk. The Fuegians had adapted to life in this harsh environment with remarkable ingenuity, developing techniques and technologies that allowed them to thrive where Europeans might easily perish. Their boats, though seemingly fragile, were perfectly designed for these waters, able to navigate through ice and around hidden rocks with ease. Their clothing, made from animal skins and feathers, provided protection from the constant wind and cold while allowing them the freedom of movement needed for their nomadic lifestyle. The first encounters between the expedition and the Fuegians were cautious but friendly, with both groups showing the natural curiosity of people meeting others completely unlike themselves. The Fuegians were fascinated by the size and construction of the European ships, while the sailors marveled at the skill with which these people navigated their treacherous homeland. Communication was difficult due to language barriers, but gestures and shared experiences gradually built bridges of understanding between the two cultures. As the fleet navigated deeper into the strait, they began to notice that the water had a different taste, less salty than the ocean they had left behind. This was a promising sign, suggesting that fresh water from the Western Ocean might be mixing with the Atlantic waters, creating a blend that spoke of connection between the two great seas. The currents, too, seemed different, sometimes pushing the ships forward as if the water itself was eager to show them the way to their destination. The navigation through the strait required all the skill and experience that Magellan and his navigators had accumulated over decades of seafaring. The tides here were complex and unpredictable, influenced by both Atlantic and Pacific patterns in ways that made traditional navigation techniques inadequate. Hidden rocks and shifting sandbars created hazards that could appear and disappear with the changing water levels, requiring constant vigilance and careful soundings to avoid disaster. The passage through the strait was slow and careful work, requiring all the skill and patience that the experienced sailors had developed during their long journey. The ships moved in single file, like a procession of pilgrims walking through a sacred place, with careful lookouts watching for hidden rocks or shallow waters. The sound of their passage echoed softly off the towering cliffs, creating a gentle music that seemed to celebrate their progress through this natural miracle. Each day brought new challenges and new wonders as they progressed through the strait. Sometimes they would encounter strong winds that funneled through the mountain passes, requiring them to lower their sails and proceed under reduced canvas. Other times the air would be so still that they needed to use their boats to tow the ships through narrow channels, the men rowing in rhythm while their voices echoed off the surrounding cliffs. At night, when the ships anchored in protected coves to rest until morning, the crew would gather on deck to marvel at the southern sky, now dominated by constellations completely unknown to European eyes. The Southern Cross blazed overhead like a celestial compass, pointing the way toward lands that existed only in their dreams and hopes. The aurora australis sometimes painted the sky in curtains of green and gold, dancing lights that seemed to celebrate their passage through this magical waterway. The aurora displays in these southern latitudes were more spectacular than anything the crew had ever witnessed, with sheets of colored light that rippled across the sky like silk banners waving in a celestial breeze. The indigenous people who witnessed these displays alongside the Europeans had their own explanations for these lights, stories that spoke of spirits dancing in the sky and ancestors watching over travelers in distant places. These shared moments of wonder helped bridge the gap between cultures, creating connections based on the universal human experience of awe in the face of natural beauty. But not all was peaceful during their journey through the strait. The San Antonio, commanded by officers who had grown fearful of the unknown dangers ahead, made a fateful decision during one dark night. While the other ships slept peacefully in their anchorage, the San Antonio quietly slipped away, returning through the strait toward the familiar waters of the Atlantic and eventually back to Spain, carrying with her many supplies and crew members who would never see the completion of their great adventure. The desertion of the San Antonio was a betrayal that cut deep into the hearts of those who remained, like discovering that a trusted friend has abandoned you in your hour of greatest need. The ship had carried not only men, but also a significant portion of their food supplies, leaving the remaining 3 ships dangerously short of provisions for the long journey that still lay ahead. Worse still, the San Antonio carried with her some of the most experienced navigators and sailors, men whose skills would be sorely missed in the challenges to come. When morning came and the San Antonio was discovered missing, a profound sadness settled over the remaining ships like morning mist on the water. They searched for their lost companion for several days, their calls echoing unanswered through the fjords and channels of the strait. But the San Antonio was already far away, carrying its cargo of fear and lost dreams back toward the world they had left behind. Magellan addressed his remaining crews with words that were both gentle and firm, acknowledging the loss they had suffered while renewing their commitment to the mission that had brought them so far from home. He reminded them that every great adventure requires sacrifices, that the path to glory is never easy, and that those who persevere in the face of adversity are the ones who write their names in the history books. His words were like a warm fire on a cold night, providing comfort and strength to men who needed both in equal measure. Despite this heartbreak, the 3 remaining ships continued their journey with renewed determination, like friends supporting each other through difficult times. The crew members who remained were those with the strongest faith in their mission, the deepest trust in their commander, and the greatest excitement about the wonders that lay ahead. They felt themselves to be part of something larger than any individual adventure. They were writing a new chapter in the story of human exploration and discovery. The loss of the San Antonio actually brought the remaining crews closer together, creating bonds of loyalty and friendship that would sustain them through the trials ahead. Men who had sailed on different ships now found themselves working side by side, sharing their skills and knowledge to ensure the success of their reduced but more determined expedition. They rationed their remaining supplies more carefully, knowing that every grain of wheat and every drop of wine might be precious in the unknown waters ahead. Day by day, the passage through the strait continued, each mile bringing them closer to their goal. The scenery around them changed gradually, the mountains becoming slightly lower, the channels wider, and the taste of the water more distinctly different from the Atlantic they had known for so long. Hope grew in their hearts like flowers blooming in spring, fed by the signs that they were indeed approaching something wonderful and new. The wildlife in the strait was abundant and unique, adapted to the special conditions of this passage between 2 great oceans. Seals hauled themselves onto ice floes to bask in the pale sunlight, while penguins dove and surfaced around the ships with the playfulness of children at a swimming hole. Whales occasionally surfaced in the deeper channels, their enormous presence reminding the sailors that they were guests in a world much larger and older than their own small human concerns. The Fuegians continued to accompany the ships on their journey, their small boats appearing and disappearing among the islands like spirits of the water. Some of the younger indigenous people seemed particularly fascinated by the Europeans, following the ships for hours while calling out in their musical language. These encounters provided welcome breaks in the tension of navigation, moments of human connection that reminded everyone that exploration was not just about finding new places, but about meeting new people. Then, on a day when the sun seemed to shine with particular brilliance and the water sparkled like liquid starlight, the lookouts on the Trinidad began to shout with excitement. Ahead of them, the narrow passage was opening into something vast and blue, stretching to the horizon in a way that spoke of enormous open spaces beyond. The mountains were falling away on either side, and before them lay waters that seemed to stretch forever, calm and peaceful under the endless sky. The moment of emergence from the strait was one of the most dramatic and emotional in the history of human exploration. After weeks of navigating through narrow channels between towering cliffs, suddenly the world opened up before them, like a door swinging wide to reveal a magnificent ballroom. The contrast was breathtaking, from the confined, echoing world of the Strait to the vast, silent expanse of the ocean that lay beyond. As the three ships sailed out of the Strait and into the vast expanse of the Western Ocean, a profound silence fell over the crews, broken only by the gentle splash of waves against their hulls and the soft whisper of wind in their sails. They had done it. They had found the passage that connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, opening a new route between the known and unknown worlds. The water before them was incredibly calm and peaceful, stretching to the horizon like a sea of liquid tranquility. Magellan stood on the deck of the Trinidad, tears of joy and wonder streaming down his weathered face as he gazed out at this new ocean that seemed to glow with its own inner light. He named it Mar Pacifico, the peaceful sea, for its waters were so calm and gentle compared to the turbulent Atlantic they had crossed months before. This was the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water on Earth, and they were the first Europeans ever to sail upon its western shores. The crew celebrated quietly, with the reverence appropriate to witnessing a miracle. They had achieved something that many had thought impossible, finding the Western Passage that opened new possibilities for trade, exploration, and human understanding. Behind them lay the strait that would forever bear Magellan's name, a testament to the power of dreams pursued with courage and determination. The sight before them was breathtaking in its simple majesty. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, its surface so smooth it looked like a mirror made of the purest blue crystal, reflecting the white clouds that drifted peacefully across the sky like cotton balls floating on a gentle breeze. Schools of fish swam just beneath the surface, their silver bodies creating ripples that caught the sunlight and scattered it in thousands of tiny diamonds across the water. As they sailed into this new ocean, the three ships seemed to glide effortlessly across its surface, their white sails billowing gently in the consistent trade winds that would carry them toward their ultimate destination. The water was so clear that they could see deep into its blue depths, where mysterious sea creatures moved like living jewels in an underwater garden. Flying fish would occasionally burst from the waves and soar alongside the ships, their fins spread wide like the wings of tiny angels celebrating their passage into this peaceful realm. The Pacific Ocean revealed itself to be even more vast and mysterious than Magellan and his crew had ever imagined, stretching away from them in all directions like a liquid world without boundaries or end. Day after day, the three ships sailed westward across waters that seemed to glow with their own inner light, following the path of the sun as it painted golden trails across the gentle waves. The ocean was so consistently calm and beautiful that it felt like sailing through a peaceful dream, with each day bringing the same blessed routine of steady winds and tranquil seas. The first days in the Pacific were marked by a sense of wonder and relief that was almost overwhelming. After the confined, dangerous passage through the strait, the open ocean felt like a vast playground where their ships could stretch their legs and run free. The winds were steady and favorable, the weather clear and mild, and the water so calm that it seemed impossible that this could be the same substance as the turbulent Atlantic they had known. The crew settled into the rhythm of life on this peaceful ocean, their daily routines becoming like a gentle meditation that connected them to the eternal dance of sea and sky. Each morning, they would wake to find the sun rising out of the water like a golden ball of fire, painting the eastern horizon in shades of coral and amber that reflected across the calm surface like watercolors bleeding into silk. The air was warm and sweet, filled with the clean scent of salt and the promise of distant lands where spices grew like flowers in enchanted gardens. The Pacific proved to be an ocean of moods and mysteries, sometimes mirror calm and other times stirred by gentle swells that lifted the ships like a mother rocking her children to sleep. The water changed colors throughout the day, from deep midnight blue in the early morning hours to brilliant turquoise at midday, and finally to gold and crimson when the sun set in the west. Each hour brought new beauty, new reasons to stand at the rail and marvel at the incredible world through which they were sailing. The wildlife of the Pacific was unlike anything they had encountered in the Atlantic. Dolphins appeared in pods of hundreds, leaping and playing around the ships with an exuberance that seemed to celebrate their passage through these waters. These Pacific dolphins were larger and more colorful than their Atlantic cousins, with markings in black and white and yellow that made them look like living works of art swimming through their liquid gallery. Whales were even more abundant here, from small pilot whales that traveled in family groups to enormous blue whales whose songs could be heard echoing through the water for miles. The sailors learned to recognize different species by their distinctive spouts and behaviors, creating an informal catalog of the magnificent creatures that shared their ocean highway. Sometimes the whales would approach the ships with apparent curiosity, surfacing nearby to observe these strange floating objects with their wise, ancient eyes. As they sailed deeper into this vast ocean, they began to encounter islands that seemed to float on the water like green jewels scattered by a giant's gentle hand. These were coral atolls, perfect circles of white sand beaches surrounding lagoons of the most incredible blue-green water they had ever seen. Palm trees leaned gracefully over the beaches, their fronds rustling in the trade winds with sounds like gentle applause, as if welcoming the travelers to this tropical paradise. The first atoll they encountered was so perfect it seemed like something from a fairy tale, with beaches of sand so white it hurt the eyes to look at it directly, and water so clear they could see coral formations 30 feet below the surface. The lagoon was protected by a barrier reef that broke the ocean swells into gentle wavelets that lapped peacefully against the shore. Coconut palms lined the beach like sentinels, their trunks curved gracefully over the water, as if bowing in welcome to their visitors from the far side of the world. The indigenous people of these island paradises paddled out to meet the ships in canoes carved from single tree trunks, their boats moving across the water with the grace of dolphins at play. These islanders were beautiful people with golden skin and bright smiles, decorated with flowers and shells that caught the sunlight like natural jewelry. They brought gifts of fresh coconuts filled with sweet milk, tropical fruits that burst with flavors like sunshine and rain combined, and fresh fish prepared in ways that made every meal a celebration. The Pacific Islanders possessed a sophistication and knowledge that amazed the European visitors, with navigation skills that allowed them to cross vast stretches of ocean using nothing but the stars, the waves, and the flight patterns of birds. Their canoes, though built without metal tools, were marvels of engineering that could outpace the European ships in favorable conditions. Their understanding of the ocean and its moods was so complete that they seemed to be part of the sea itself rather than merely traveling upon it. The exchanges between the sailors and the islanders were filled with wonder and joy, as two different worlds met and found friendship across the bridge of human kindness. The islanders showed the Europeans how to climb palm trees to gather coconuts, how to spear fish in the clear lagoon waters, and how to weave baskets from palm fronds with the patience and skill of master craftsmen. In return, the sailors shared stories of their journey from lands across the great ocean, drawing pictures in the sand of snow-covered mountains and great cities built of stone. The tropical fruits of these islands were revelations to men who had been living on preserved ships' rations for many months. Breadfruit, when roasted over open fires, tasted like the finest European bread, but with a sweetness that seemed to capture the essence of tropical sunshine. Bananas, unknown in Europe, provided instant energy and sweetness that made them ideal food for sailors working in the tropical heat. Papayas and mangoes dripped with juices that were better than any wine, while coconuts provided both refreshing milk and nutritious meat that could sustain a man for days. On these peaceful islands, surrounded by the gentle music of waves lapping against white sand beaches and palm fronds rustling in the warm breeze, the crew could rest and repair their ships while enjoying the simple pleasures of tropical paradise. They would swim in lagoons so clear they could see tropical fish swimming among coral gardens far below, like living rainbows in an underwater wonderland. At night, they would sleep on beaches under skies so filled with stars that it seemed like sailing through a sea of diamonds. The coral reefs around these islands were underwater gardens of incredible beauty and diversity, with formations that looked like underwater castles built by fairy architects. Fish of every color imaginable swam through these coral gardens, from tiny jewel-bright specimens that darted like living gemstones to larger fish with patterns so intricate they looked like swimming works of art. The sailors would spend hours floating in the warm water, gazing down at these underwater paradises with the wonder of children visiting their first circus. But the ocean was not always kind to the small fleet. As they sailed further west, they encountered regions where the wind died completely, leaving them becalmed in waters that stretched like glass in every direction, so still that the ship's reflections appeared perfect and unbroken on the surface. During these times, the crew would lower boats and row their ships forward yard by yard, their oars cutting through water that felt as thick as honey, while the sun beat down from a sky without clouds. The periods of calm in the Pacific were unlike anything the sailors had experienced in the Atlantic, where, even in still weather, there was usually some movement of air or water to help their progress. Here, the ocean could become so perfectly still that it seemed like sailing across a vast mirror, with the ships and their crews reflected perfectly in the motionless water below. The silence during these calms was profound, broken only by the gentle splash of oars and the quiet conversations of men working together to keep their ships moving toward their distant goal. These periods of calm tested the crew's patience and endurance, but they also revealed the deep bonds of friendship and trust that had developed during their long journey together. Sailors from different countries worked side by side, sharing their water rations and encouraging each other with songs and stories that helped pass the long, hot hours. They told tales of their homelands and their families, of festivals and celebrations they hoped to see again, weaving a tapestry of human experience that connected them all as brothers in adventure. During the long, hot days of rowing through becalmed seas, the crew developed new techniques for moving their ships efficiently through the still water. They learned to work in shifts, with some men rowing while others rested in whatever shade they could find, rotating positions so that no one became exhausted. They discovered that their ships moved more easily if they were towed by boats rather than pushed, and they developed signals and rhythms that allowed the different boats to work together like the oars of a single, enormous rowing shell. When storms did come to the Pacific, they were unlike the tempests they had known in the Atlantic. These were tropical storms that arrived with little warning, turning the peaceful ocean into a churning wilderness of towering waves and driving rain. But even in these challenging moments, there was a different quality to the storms. They seemed more like a great creature stretching and yawning than the angry tantrums of the Atlantic weather. The Pacific storms were spectacular displays of nature's power, with lightning that illuminated the ocean for miles around and thunder that seemed to roll from one horizon to the other. The waves, though large, were more regular and predictable than Atlantic storm waves, allowing experienced sailors to ride them with something approaching confidence. Rain would fall in torrents that filled every container on the ships, providing precious fresh water that tasted sweeter than wine to men who had learned to value every drop. The crew had become expert at reading the subtle signs of changing weather, the way certain seabirds would disappear before a storm, how the color of the water would shift from brilliant blue to deep green, the feeling of pressure in the air that made everyone restless and alert. They would secure their ships with the practiced efficiency of musicians tuning their instruments, every rope and sail positioned perfectly to ride out whatever the ocean chose to send their way. When the storms passed, they would find themselves in waters even more beautiful than before, washed clean and sparkling like newly polished jewels. As weeks turned into months on the vast Pacific, the crew began to understand that this ocean was truly enormous, larger than all their maps and calculations had suggested. They were crossing not just a sea, but an entire world of water, with its own weather patterns, its own rhythms, and its own mysterious beauty that revealed itself slowly to those patient enough to observe and appreciate it. Each day brought small discoveries, new types of clouds that formed in different patterns, seabirds they had never seen before, schools of dolphins that seemed to follow the ships for the sheer joy of companionship. The immensity of the Pacific began to affect the crew in different ways, with some finding the endless horizon peaceful and meditative, while others grew restless and anxious for the sight of land. Magellan proved to be a master of maintaining morale during these long weeks, organizing entertainments and contests that kept the men occupied and engaged. Evening concerts became regular events, with sailors sharing the traditional music of their homelands while others learned new songs and dances from their shipmates. The food supplies that had seemed so abundant when they left the strait began to dwindle as the crossing continued far longer than anyone had anticipated. The crew learned to supplement their diet with fish caught from the ship's boats, seabirds that landed on their rigging during storms, and occasional gifts from friendly islanders when they were fortunate enough to encounter inhabited atolls. They rationed their fresh water carefully, catching rainwater in sails during the tropical storms and learning to appreciate every drop as if it were liquid gold. The ship's cooks became masters of creating nourishing and flavorful meals from increasingly limited ingredients, using spices and techniques learned from the various peoples they had encountered to transform basic preserved foods into dishes that maintained morale and health. They learned to catch and prepare seaweed, which provided essential nutrients that prevented scurvy, and to make nutritious broths from fish bones and scraps that might otherwise have been thrown overboard. Every meal became a small celebration, an opportunity to share food and fellowship that strengthened the bonds between crew members. Despite these challenges, the morale of the crew remained high, sustained by the incredible beauty that surrounded them and the growing realization that they were accomplishing something truly historic. They were crossing an ocean that no European had ever seen, following stars that their ancestors had never known existed, sailing toward lands that lived only in legends and dreams. Each sunset painted the sky in colors so beautiful that grown men would stand in silent wonder, while each sunrise brought the promise of new discoveries just beyond the horizon. The sunsets in the Pacific were spectacular beyond description, with the sun sinking into the water like a golden coin dropped into a vast blue purse, its light creating pathways across the water that seemed to lead directly to heaven. The sky would explode in colors that had no names, shades of orange and pink and purple that blended and shifted like living paintings created by divine artists. These daily displays of natural beauty became religious experiences for many of the crew, moments of communion with the infinite that reminded them how small they were in the grand scheme of creation. The three ships, Trinidad, Conception, and Victoria, sailed in loose formation across the endless blue, like a small family of explorers supporting each other through the greatest adventure in the history of the world. Their white sails caught the steady trade winds that pushed them ever westward toward the legendary Spice Islands that had inspired this entire magnificent journey. Behind them, the sun would set in a blaze of gold and crimson, while ahead the stars would appear one by one, guiding them toward their destiny with the patient constancy of ancient friends. As they sailed deeper into the Pacific, approaching waters that would bring them close to the Philippines and the rich islands of Southeast Asia, the crew could feel the excitement building like the approach of dawn after a long, beautiful night. They were nearing the end of their crossing of the peaceful ocean, approaching lands where spices grew wild and civilizations had flourished for thousands of years. The water began to take on different colors, shifting from deep blue to green and turquoise, suggesting the presence of land and shallow seas ahead. New types of seabirds appeared, species that nested on land and flew far from shore to hunt, their presence like messengers announcing that their crossing of the vast Pacific was finally nearing its end. The crew would stand at the bow of their ships in the early morning hours, scanning the horizon for any sign of the tropical paradise they knew must be waiting just beyond the edge of sight. Each day brought them closer to achieving what had once seemed impossible, sailing completely across the largest ocean on Earth and proving that the world was truly round, connected by water into one great sphere of wonder and possibility. Then, on a morning when the sun rose with particular brilliance and the water sparkled like liquid diamonds, a cry rang out from the lookout on the Trinidad that sent excitement racing through all three ships like wildfire. "Land ho! Islands ahead!" The crew rushed to the rails to see green islands rising from the blue water like emerald gems set in a crown of coral and white sand, their shores lined with palm trees and their peaks covered in the lush green vegetation of the tropics. These were the Philippine Islands, a scattered paradise of thousands of tropical islands where ancient cultures had developed their own beautiful ways of life. As the ships approached these magical islands, the crew could see smoke rising from cooking fires, boats moving between the islands like water beetles on a pond, and people gathering on the beaches to watch the approach of these strange vessels with their white sails and foreign crews. This was another new world, different from both Europe and the Americas, with its own languages, customs, and ancient wisdom to share with the visitors from across the endless ocean. The successful crossing of the Pacific Ocean was one of the greatest achievements in the history of human exploration, proving that the Earth's oceans were all connected, and that determined sailors could reach any part of the world by following the paths of wind and current. But for Magellan and his crew, weary from their long months at sea, the sight of these beautiful tropical islands meant something even more precious: the end of their crossing of the peaceful ocean and the beginning of the final phase of their incredible journey around the world. They had sailed from Spain across the Atlantic, through the treacherous strait at the bottom of South America, and across the vast Pacific to reach these spice-scented shores, accomplishing what many had thought impossible and opening new pathways between the continents of the earth. As the three ships sailed into the protected waters between the Philippine Islands, surrounded by the gentle beauty of tropical paradise and the warm welcome of indigenous peoples who had never seen European ships before, the crew felt a deep sense of accomplishment mixed with wonder at the incredible journey they had completed. They had proven that the world was round, that all oceans were connected, and that human courage and determination could overcome any obstacle, no matter how vast or mysterious it might seem. Behind them lay the endless blue Pacific, now crossed and mapped and no longer unknown, while ahead lay the final portion of their circumnavigation of the globe, the journey home through the Indian Ocean and around the Cape of Good Hope to complete the first voyage around the entire world. But even as they celebrated their success in reaching the Philippines, the crew knew that their greatest challenges might still lie ahead. The tropical diseases of Southeast Asia, the complex politics of local rulers, and the long journey home through waters controlled by Portuguese competitors would test their courage and determination in ways they could not yet imagine. Yet, surrounded by the beauty of these tropical islands and sustained by the knowledge of what they had already accomplished, they felt ready for whatever adventures awaited them in this final chapter of their historic journey around the world. Here in the Philippines, Magellan would meet his fate not from the dangers of storm or sea, but from the spears of warriors defending their homeland in a place called Mactan. Though the great navigator would not live to see the completion of his dream, his vision and leadership had already achieved the impossible, opening a pathway across the Pacific that would change the world forever. The remaining crew, led by Juan Sebastian Elcano, would eventually continue westward in the Victoria, becoming the first humans to circumnavigate the entire globe, and proving once and for all that our world is a single, interconnected sphere floating in the vastness of space. The story of Magellan's voyage had become a tale of human achievement that would inspire explorers and dreamers for centuries to come, proving that no dream is too large, no ocean too vast, and no challenge too great for those who pursue their goals with patience, courage, and unwavering faith in the possibilities that lie just beyond the horizon. As the sun set over the Philippine Islands, painting the tropical sky in shades of gold and crimson that reflected across the calm waters of the bay, the crew of the 3 remaining ships prepared for the final chapters of their incredible adventure, knowing that they had already achieved something that would change the world forever. They had sailed across the Pacific Ocean, opening a new pathway between East and West, and proven once and for all that the Earth was a single, connected world of infinite beauty and possibility, waiting to be explored by those brave enough to follow their dreams across the endless blue horizon. And so ends our gentle tale of Magellan's incredible voyage, dear listener. Though Ferdinand Magellan himself would not complete the full journey around the world, his vision and courage opened pathways across the oceans that connected all the continents of Earth. The remaining crew members, led by Juan Sebastian Elcano, would eventually return to Spain in the Victoria, completing the first circumnavigation of our beautiful planet and proving that all the world's oceans flow together as one. As you drift off to sleep, imagine those brave sailors on their peaceful ocean following the stars toward new discoveries, reminding us that every great adventure begins with a dream, and the courage to pursue it across whatever vast and beautiful challenges may lie ahead. Sweet dreams, and may your own adventures be filled with wonder, friendship, and the joy of discovering new horizons.